He was elected in 2018 and has had cabinet member responsibility for adult social care, public health, housing, leisure and education prior to becoming leader. Outside of politics, she's a massive Saints fan. Oh, sorry, she's a postgraduate researcher at the University of Southampton, investigating the impact of the GDPR on voluntary organisations. So welcome along, thank you very much. Ryan Harris works for CPRE. He's an experienced property professional with a demonstrable track record in development, covering multiple sectors, including residential, build-to-rent, PBSA. I wasn't quite sure what that stood for, Ryan. PBSA.
Purpose-built student
accommodation. There we go. Purpose-built student accommodation, native living, and mixed use. So thank you very much for coming. Tristan Samuels, Group Development and New Business Director for Vivid. Tristan's a chartered surveyor with over 25 years property experience in the public and private sectors, and for the last 12 years he's been delivering mixed-use developments in Westminster and Portsmouth, so quite other end of the scale, and he's focusing on housing pipelines and regeneration. So obviously you all know about the Tipner project in Portsmouth. That's a big regen project, but his role at Vivid is focused on ensuring delivery of their ambitious development programmes or of affordable homes. Next we have, he says, hold on. David, sorry about this. He's the founder and CEO. David Smith Milne says his role is to scale the business as we bring together expertise in placemaking and breathe new life into what are often run down and underperforming larger former council estates. He was formerly at Place First, which he exited in 2020, and he said that while he was there, they delivered the 400-unit Liverpool housing scheme at Welsh Streets, ending the blight caused by over 700 empty properties in Toxteth following a failed housing market scheme. So thank you very much for coming along, that's very helpful. And then Aaron Wright, Taylor Wimpey, represented in the room, a chartered town planner with 20 years experience in planning and development, successfully delivering consents for large-scale residential-led schemes. She's worked in all sectors of planning, from local authority, national house builder and consultancy, and is well versed in all areas of the planning system, including planning appraisals, planning applications, Section 106 agreements and appeals. So anyway, that's the introductions out of the way. Today we are going to explore solutions for meeting the ambitious 1.5 million house target of homes to be built during the next Parliament. We're going to dive into a few little strategies, understanding the barriers that there are for this type of development. We're going to talk about public and private collaboration as well. We're going to talk about what we can do now and what we need to look at for the long term to try and deliver this type of result. And from a regional focus point of view, Lorna, I imagine you'll have some bits and bobs to say about that too, really. So I think probably we'll start with a question. Probably should be you, Tristan, I think. How do we feel the proposed revisions to the NPPF will assist with housing delivery? And also, do we think some of the plan changes went far enough or were bold enough in light of the scale of the challenge?
Thank you, George. I think the first thing to say is it's really positive that they've made some changes and they've stepped out and they've come up with a positive narrative about where they want to go. Whether it's deliverable or not is a different matter, I think. I don't think I'll be judging them on the 1.5 million, I'll be judging them on the work they do to actually enable us to get there, maybe in the second term. The NPPF, I think, is a good first step, but actually I don't think it goes far enough. I actually don't think the planning system on its own is the solution to our problems. I think what you've got there is quite a narrow focus around a set of rules. The planning system, in my mind, and in all the developers' mind, is a much bigger organisation. It involves the other parts of central government, your environment agencies, your natural inlands, your MMOs. It involves your highways authorities and all the rest of it. And I think there's some real alignment required within those. The NPPF is a nice first step, but I don't think it's going to get us all the way.
Yeah. Okay, good. Ryan. Build to rent. We've never seen more build to rent than we have at the moment. We'll talk about that a little bit later as well in a bit more detail. But how can this tenure help meet government targets? What challenge do you think we face as a result of that?
Thank you, George. Well, build to rent is a relatively new tenure, particularly in the regions. As some people in the room will know, we've seen a lot in London, and very few have come out in the regional towns. I think of very two examples in Southampton, whilst there's been some consent, softening of yields has meant that those sites have not come forward, thinking Toys R Us, Debenhams, etc. I think the rental market has a bigger piece to play in the overall delivery of homes, and I think it's probably a forgotten element to this whole jigsaw puzzle of just focusing on perhaps the mainstream house builders delivering. We get many inquiries from larger pension funds that are seeking to invest in the build to rent, or certainly in the single family housing market. The frustration, despite the weight of capital there is, they're not able to transact ultimately, and that might just be a combination of the house builders having a reluctance to sell for whatever reason, or the planning consents aren't quite geared up for what that is. But I do think that's a tenure that will see huge growth, and single family housing, suburban housing is less than 1% of the overall piece, so there's a huge growth.
Thank you, Ryan. That's great. Tristan, do we feel that a change in government structures in our region may aid the drive towards greater housing delivery, and in what way?
Getting very political. I do like the talk of devolution. I'm unapologetically a fan of the devolution. I think the local councils in this region have fallen a long way behind in terms of the money that's been brought into the region versus what's gone up north. We were with Homes England last week ago at their investment symposium, talking to the Homes England team who specialise in devolution, and they were quite unashamed about the fact that 13% of their funding goes to the Greater Manchester region, who only have 6% of the population that work with them. And when I quizzed them on that, their answer was fairly straightforward. He said, well, they've got a local growth plan. They can demonstrate they can absorb more money than anyone else, so that's where we take our money to. Hampshire, Solent need to get together, come up with a local growth plan, linking all that infrastructure that's being missed out. I mean, and there's too much tension between those bodies. A bit of strategic planning, what could go wrong? Or what could go right?
Exactly. David, we are not leaving you out. We've never built 300,000 homes a year. And currently the amount of new homes, as we might see if you heard at 8:30 this morning, it's on a downward trend, the amount of homes being built. And actually, we're building the least number of homes since Q4 2017 currently. Planning consents as well is something to look at, interestingly. They've fallen from 325,000 planning consents in Feb 2021 to 232,000 today, so £100,000 less. David, what quick fixes can help the planning system?
I think we only built 300,000 homes in 1959, and that was the last peak of house building. Obviously, this city was a real driver of that. This city created a significant amount of new homes out of necessity. Obviously, the city was heavily bombed in the Second World War, lost 11,000 dwellings. And actually, if Southampton was doing what it did then, now, it would be heralded as probably the best council in the country for housing delivery, because it used everything in terms of modern methods of construction. Things were delivered quickly, very efficiently, and made available to the population very, very affordably. So it can be done. Where I think we need to focus places like Southampton today, though, I'm not quite answering your question here, but people have to recognise how complex and interwoven these things are. I was in the city yesterday in London and talking to a set of stockbrokers who were telling me that actually, because of the budget and because of the draw of capital into the bond markets and gilts, London needs to borrow more money to finance its infrastructure programme, the capital that would have found its way into yielding equities like private rental houses, student houses, etc., is no longer or significantly less interested, and as a consequence of decisions that were made in the very best interest but have unintended consequences. The level of trading now in listed yielding assets is typically about 30% of their actual value. And as a consequence, to be able to get things like build to rent moving in places like Southampton, where construction costs are inevitably going to be challenging, rents are going to be set by the market, to get to the yield that an investor needs in a market which is significantly now less attractive, is going to be really, really problematic. So, whilst on the one hand the government can feel like it's giving with planning reforms, etc., on the other hand it's definitely taking away, and I think there are some significant unintended consequences that are going to unfold in front of us over the next 12 months.
Okay, thank you very much. Lorna, Southampton's obviously a key battleground for you. You're an expert on Southampton, I'd probably be suffice to say. But we're currently at a stage in Southampton where there are obviously quite a few schemes stalling. Obviously, Ryan, you've alluded to the fact of the money and the yields and how that affects a build-to-rent scheme. What do you think will make the difference in Southampton to get these schemes built without saying the word Renaissance?
I think I can talk a bit partly about us as a city council, and anybody who was here earlier when we talked about the R word, cusp of the Renaissance that we're on. And there's partly about the way we work as a local authority to make sure that we're really efficient so that schemes can come through. But there have been many issues relating to just the whole development market that have stalled a huge number of sites, and we're starting to see them unlock, and I'm hoping to see them unlock quicker so that we can get Southampton moving in the way that we know it needs to do. I'm talking about devolution because I think that's a really big part of it, and actually what I would say is that we are working really well together across Hampshire, Southampton, the Isle of Wight and Portsmouth, probably in a way we haven't worked previously in the past, and that's to do with changes of leadership in certain areas where we say the Hampshire word because that's where the discord has often happened, and the process to get devolution is something that is deeply political. It will be agreed at a local authority leader place, but as long as we can articulate what it means to everybody in this region, in this city, I believe it's something that we really will get through despite the political differences that have been there in the past, which have genuinely been around geography, mayors. I hate the idea of a mayor, I'll be really honest about it, but actually what I know is that this government that we've got now, they want to devolve England, and we need to, that's the only way forward to unlock those powers, unlock the money, and to get the decision making as local as possible. I'd like that decision making to be here in the city, but actually there is something really important about doing it at that wider regional scale, because when we come to the housing market, Southampton is actually quite landlocked, and the type of properties that we'll be bringing forward will mainly be in flats. That's a challenge for itself that so many developers are exiting from that market. But for the people who come and work in Southampton, they don't necessarily live in Southampton, so we need to be working with Hampshire, with the district and borough as well. And a devolved model will help us do that in a way that just having individual planning targets won't do, because we'll be working for a regional housing plan rather than just a Southampton plan. In regards to like growth and prosperity we talked about earlier, so we are working, Hampshire are working on a growth and prosperity plan. I think theirs has been published now. The Solar Growth Partnership, which is Southampton, Portsmouth and the Isle of Wight, will be due to publish ours shortly, and we're working on one in Southampton. And what will happen with devolution is we'll still have plans for individual bits of the region, because the region has got different bits in it, but they can all come together, and those synergies will come together and maximise that out. So I think devolution is a game changer. I am absolutely determined that we get it, and we get it early, because we don't want to be left with the dregs of those places that have said, no, we're not sure, we feel a bit uncomfortable with that. So I'm really pragmatic, and I will overturn my ideology to say this is what we need for this city and for this region. So it will really help us with the housing market. But in terms of delivery, as a local authority, people look to us to do an awful lot, but we can't. When it comes to affordable homes, which is where a lot of people look to us, we know we can't do that ourselves, and actually we haven't done that very well in Southampton. So it's about really making sure we maximise out those public-private partnerships. We work really well with registered providers, because what I want to see is lots of different housing coming through in Southampton in a very short period of time. I need to address 80,000 people on the housing waiting list. I also though need to address the fact that everybody celebrates that Southampton's a really affordable place to buy a home. That's great, until you think about the council tax that I collect to pay for adult social care and children's social care. It's a really low tax base. So what I need is to have affordable homes, but I also need to have more aspirational housing, so that those people who live and have big bucks and really, really good salaries in Southampton are actually living in Southampton in housing that raises my council tax base, and they're spending that money here in the city. I think that's really important that people have got that stake, but they won't be able to do that if we're not able to get the homes to do that. So it's about working with those people who build that type of housing as well. And then the final thing I think we really need to address is about the rental market. And this is something that we really need to go to government for. In Southampton, 29% of properties are in the private rental sector, which is massive, even for a university town. But it's really expensive to rent. So people, we've heard earlier, people can't afford to save up for their deposits because they're paying these high levels of rent. So that's something that does need to be addressed. But the other real impact that has is when you're bringing forward these schemes that have to have affordable housing in it, if the only way to make that scheme viable is that it's an affordable rent model, that becomes a problem for our people on the housing register who tend to have lower wages, because 80% of the market rent actually isn't affordable to anybody. So I'm lobbying government through my role on key cities to say, let's relook at what affordable rent actually means, so that it's based on local housing allowance, which means you can still build an affordable rent model, but people who live in cities like this can actually afford to live in those homes. Is that helpful?
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose the rise in council tax is going to help you a bit.
Rising council tax will always help a little bit, but there is always increasing demand on the public purse, particularly in areas of adult and social care, and that is a real problem.
I think all councils are suffering, aren't they, from a financial point of view. Aaron, we haven't forgotten you. And I think I'm going to talk about some real swear words when it comes to the Solent. Nitrates, phosphates, BNG, biodiversity net gain, all the words that make a scheme unviable. What do you think needs to change here to make developments? And also, you're selling some large schemes. You're big. I'm sure you've driven down the A31. You've seen Telly scheme starting in Alresford. We're going to be selling from our office in Jam. But yeah, I mean, what needs to change here to push that forward from a social perspective?
Yeah, I think nutrient neutrality is a real issue at the moment. So we've got 150,000 homes in the UK that is locked by nutrients, and that's across 74 councils. So this has to be unlocked to help provide the housing that we need in the UK. And most of these houses have actually got an outline consent and have been caught at the reserve matter stage. I think the government hasn't looked at this and realised the impact of it, and we need the government now to be strong and actually find a solution. And it also involves local authorities helping to find solutions through credit schemes and different options to unlock this housing, because with the BNG and nutrients, phosphates, it is causing real issues in terms of us being able to build on site. So it's just adding to the cost of our housing schemes. And then one of the biggest issues is also building supply. Trying to get bricks at the moment is a real issue, and also having the labour as well. So we're kind of getting hit by all sides, really.
Yeah, and I saw the OBS was saying that actually it's tricky to get, if you're going to build 1.5 million homes over 4 years, you've got to have the people, the supply, product, everything to click into place to do that. And at the moment, but obviously the ambition is good, just to start off with, I think, already.
Yeah, and I think Cllr would be very supportive of the changes suggested in the MPPF consultation, and especially reversing some of the December 2023 MPPF requirements. So I think having a minimum target of 370,000 homes a year, having 5-year housing land supplies, housing delivery tests, and actually having up-to-date local plans is really important. We need an effective planning system in order to deliver housing. And at the moment, only 40% of local authorities have an up-to-date local plan. And by 2025, it will be 78% of local plans across the country will be out of date. So we need councils to start being more proactive and supportive of having a plan-led system. There's so many authorities across the South Coast now that have paused on their local plan, or are trying to push their local plan through before the MPPF gets adopted, so that they don't have to meet these new housing targets. And the only way we're going to meet the government's ambitious target is by having an effective planning system, and that way it provides confidence in the market, and it gives confidence to our suppliers, and it gives confidence to us to actually go ahead and build our sites and to go out there and sell.
Yeah, thank you very much. David, I think you've seen, we've all seen recently that Angela Rayner's taken control of that nice big housing scheme in Kent near Sittingbourne, 8,000 units. She's called it in, hasn't she? Do you think we're going to see more intervention from Angela and the government on these types of schemes?
I think the government are genuinely still learning. It staggers me at points to understand who's advising. It's certainly not me. But I think the government obviously want to make some radical changes to the way Homes England work. We've seen that with Peter Denton's news this week. I think as an agency, it has generally struggled with its identity and role, and its capacity to facilitate the market, therefore, has come under extreme pressure. So some sort of vehicle through which resources are deployed is clearly needed, but at the moment it's deeply inefficient as a housing delivery agency. All statistics bear that out. So some fundamental changes at a national level are relevant. We've talked about different infrastructure for governance in the regions, and a shift towards a mayoral system. The point that was made around Manchester is a very valid one. For a long time, the city's had a very clear and investable plan. But I spend a lot of time in Manchester, and the corollary of that plan is an awful lot of product being created which doesn't create significant social value. So it's a balancing act all the time. We have an awful lot of very nice tower blocks in and around the city of Manchester, most of which are benefiting overseas investors as opposed to tackled underlying housing issues. So whether or not a shift towards a mayoral system, which is being heralded in Manchester as a really successful one, has probably been challenged and unpicked, is something I think government really desperately should do, because it's concentrated power quite narrowly, and that has led to a very tight and focused distribution of limited resources and the creation of one underlying housing product, which is an investor-led, overseas disposed of, apartment-led scheme. So it hasn't actually impacted positively on housing output. It's created wealth and prosperity and growth, which is all clearly needed, but it hasn't tackled the underlying issue of significant homelessness and significant numbers of people completely trapped in housing waiting lists.
Lorna, I think you wanted to...
Yeah, just because I absolutely agree with you around how growth has happened in combined authorities, and something that we've talked about an awful lot between the leaders here in Hampshire and Solent region is that we don't want growth for growth's sake. It has to actually benefit the people who live here, the people who live in deprivation. Southampton is the 55th most deprived local authority in the country. If we get a load of new house building here and it doesn't make a difference to those people's lives, we get a load of new skills and jobs and employment here, it doesn't change those people's lives, I actually don't see much of the point of it, because that is the point of growth. It's about benefiting the whole country, just not a very narrow section. So that's the sort of arrangements and deals that we will be asking government for, are also very much based on improving the lives of everybody, not just improving the balance sheet.
Yeah, and I think there's been a lot of talk about Southampton being an affordable place to live, but I think that needs to be in context of wages, because I think the average wage, according to ONS, I think is something like 33,000 for Southampton, and so that's a multiplier of 7 times to buy a house, and I don't think there's a mortgage company out there that will underwrite that at the moment. So, I'm a big fan of the rental market. I've said that here already. I think that's got a large part to play, and I think here in the UK we seem to be fixated with owning everything: cars, houses, etc. But I'd like to think that generationally that's going to change, and I think that car schemes will be the way forward, particularly with urban development. We're advising on some city centre sites at the moment here in Southampton. We're looking at car sharing schemes. I think electric cars. I have daughters that will probably never drive a car because it will all be automated. So I think some planning around that infrastructure needs to happen now, and I do think that that's something that maybe just isn't being talked about enough.
David, is there anything that you think from your point of view, is there anything from all five of you that sort of floors open to all of you, that you've got a bee in your bonnet and there's something that's burning a hole there and you think, well, actually, I need to mention it, I need to talk about how we're going to, obviously we've got a limited amount of time there.
Well, very quickly, I think you're absolutely right. Rental is invariably the future, inevitably the future. 23% of all homes in America that were affordable were bought by institutional funds last year. Okay, and that's not new homes, it's just homes. So there is a conceivable future that properties for sale in this country on Rightmove are just acquired by institutional capital, because the affordability gap is going to worsen and worsen and worsen. Construction costs are invariably going to increase. Land supply, we can't change it. So there's invariably going to be cost pressures on the supply and creation of new homes always in front of us. Okay, we don't have anything like the level of wage growth to be commensurate with that. So rental is absolutely a critical pillar of long-term sustainable housing markets. But we have to create a financial environment which makes the delivery of that stock viable and affordable. If there's one thing I could do to make a huge change to this, it's actually the way we appraise affordable housing projects. Our road infrastructure projects are appraised on a 60-year NPV in this country. In Germany, that's 100 years. But most affordable housing projects are appraised on 35 to 45-year cash flows. How often do we demolish a house after 35 or 45 years? We don't. But if we build really, really good quality houses, why can't we appraise them on a much longer income cash flow? And then the requirement for grant is substantially reduced. So if you had a 100-year development appraisal for a house and you force the industry to build to a quality where 100 years lasted, and the standards were designed into it, I think we would in one stroke take away the need for affordable housing grants in this country.
Well, like Wellborn, they're calling it a 100-year town, aren't they? Near Fareham, being sold by Charters as well next year. Ryan, anything from your point of view?
I guess for the master planners in the room, I think we've been looking at a scheme where the developer was considering or seeking to divide up 600 to 700 units in 3 tranches, built for sale, built to rent, and affordable housing. And I think that has definitely a place to play, and particularly Whiteley has been a focus area. We've seen a lot of investment from the build-to-rent sector in there. There's good infrastructure, schools, employment, food and beverage all on the doorstep. So if we can create those communities, and I appreciate that's not city centre stuff, but I think, as David said, the market for single-family housing, suburban single-family housing, is less than 1% of the overall rental market, so there's a huge growth area.
Aaron, any little one takeaway?
Yeah, I think there's just got to be greater flexibility in terms of policies to allow all these different types of affordable homes to come forward. At the moment, a lot of local plans are out of date. North Dorset is using a policy from 8 years ago. Well, the housing, has changed since 6 years ago, and so they're still basing planning applications on that policy. So we need to have greater flexibility in policy and greater flexibility in Section 106 agreements, so that if there isn't a demand for a policy compliant mix, that there is alternative options, so that we can still see developments delivered. And I think councils have got to start working more closely with affordable housing providers, with developers, and there's got to be greater collaboration between us all.
Thank you. Lorna?
I'd like government to just have a read or think about how they structure themselves, because what I'd really like to see is not a Ministry of Housing local government. I'd like to have a Ministry of Housing again, because I think that's absolutely needed, and a separate one for local government. There is nothing in the society that's more important than a secure and stable home. It ensures people have access to good education, good health, good well-being, they can remain in employment. And it doesn't really matter what tenure it is, as long as there is stability around it. And it's much wider than local government, which is why I think there should be an absolute dedicated focus on it, because it is the fundamental bedrock. So that would be my ask to government next time I speak to them.
Thank you very much. Tristan?
I think we're in danger of violently agreeing with each other, but I think Placemaking is something that's come through in everyone's sort of conversations there. I'd take it a little bit further and say that from a registered provider's perspective, our position really is about people at the end of that. And so the public realm and all the physical build is actually, it isn't just about the planner's view of that place, but it's also about the community's view of that place. So, and that's something that we're trying to push forward about placemaking, mix and balance communities, and a people-first approach.
Right, well this is the perfect opportunity for some questions. We've got a really good panel here. Who has got a question for the panel? Anybody? Here we are.
Hi there, Dan from CPS. What could the panel say about whether the government's moving fast enough on the future home standard?
I can take that one. It is causing us issues at the moment because they keep putting back consultation. So I keep changing the house types on my schemes because we just don't know what's happening. And obviously some of our sites will be built out in the next 10 years. So Cllr are very much about looking to future homes and delivering them now, bringing about air source heat pumps and EV charging points and greater energy efficiency in our homes, but without any certainty from the government about future homes. We're still in this
Limbo,
yeah, and also it's impacting on our supply chain because we don't know what future homes is going to be. So for us, we would like the government to get on with it, to be honest, because we actually think it's really important to be delivering sustainable homes.
Anybody else? Oh, here, sorry. Oh, right, sorry. Yeah,
I think it was touched on briefly around the labour market and the ability to build homes. I just wondered if you had any comments on resourcing, because I think one of the challenges at every level from determining applicants to actually building the houses is that there's not enough people within the construction industry. That's planners, that's ecologists, PNG, that's people who are any thoughts on that?
Well, I think the starting point is the 300 extra planners are most welcome, but I don't think that's going to be more than a drop in the ocean. I think everyone would agree that there is a massive shortage of it in all the industries. And actually, if you look at the biggest blockers for development, planning is in there. But the other things that are really hurting us are utilities, and that's capacity on the grid as well as labour to install. Site teams are changing constantly. We see a massive drop in quality as soon as we lose, as site teams change around. I think it takes a long time to train a planner, but actually it takes just as long to get decent bricklayers and decent chimneys and everything else. And really, we don't see enough of that. I think companies are quite reticent to invest in those because actually the labour market is so transient as well. You feel like you've trained someone else. I would say that local authorities are fantastic seedbeds for developing talent. Having worked at two, I'm a big fan of them. Always being very quick to take on young people, help them develop. You get a wide range of skill sets. Doesn't quite help all the construction side of the business, but I think that sort of attitude in a lot of industries would be helpful.
Thank you very much. Thanks. We've got a question over here.
Yeah. My ME friend just helped me confirm this. So Tony Goldstein, Reliant Capital. Would it be a more sensible approach for labor to go to 1.5 million planning permissions than homes in 5 years? So we were just talking, it's about 6 gigawatts of electricity needed to build that many homes. That doesn't exist. The planners are right, there's not enough. You need statutory consultees and the EA, highways to be able to make decisions. The planners don't make any difference in that matter. They got to get the right results back. And our labor market's inactive. What the average brickie is, 50? 52? So would it be better to go to, getting planning permissions in 5 years than this ridiculous amount that's on the screen right now?
I'm obviously not going to answer for the government. That would be really inappropriate for me
Good
to
point.
do so. But I think it's a valid question to ask, and it should be asked, and it should be thought about. The electricity supply issue, the grid. That is massive. Not just for house building. It's huge for us in Southampton. The port want to be like the first net zero port, and they can't because we can't get supply in. But I was at an event this week for UK ports, and apparently there's an announcement coming out recently about grid capacity and how that might be looked at differently. Because we know there's actually a bit like land banking, there's grid banking. So maybe there's going to be some work done around that we need to see. But as I say, it is still a new government. They are still learning. What I'm saying, they are listening, and they're listening really well at local authority level, which has never happened before in this way, and that's under previous Labour governments as well. And that actually gives me great hope, because they're coming and asking the right questions and then flexing and changing their plans as a result of that. So I think that's really helpful for this entire industry, to be honest, because much of what Labour want to achieve in their 5 missions is really only going to be delivered at a local authority or a combined authority level. So they need to keep speaking to us. We are then able to feed those conversations back that we have with people like yourself, and they're then having it from a different perspective. And what we do know as well is that rather than working in those silos, which has been really difficult, government department doing this government department doing that, which has causes all sorts of problems within this industry. They're working around the missions, so they've still got their departments. They come together around each of those missions, and that should help unlock some of the problems that happen at central government level that impact on development. So I actually have great hope. Well, I obviously have great hope, but what I am seeing stuff that will, I think, make a difference to us, which we wouldn't have seen from even previous Labour governments.
Yeah, some real valid points there, though, and I think the plan is to build 600,000 homes in year 5. Now, this guy over here has a question as well.
How do the new legislation affect the construction industry and other plans to become compliant?
So I didn't hear that. Sorry.
How do the new legislation affect the construction industry and other plans to become more compliant?
Well, how do the ULEZ zones affect the construction industry from a London perspective? Is that or?
What's the code enforcement as well?
Oh, enforcement. Sorry. Yeah. Oh, is it? Oh, right. Sorry. I was wondering actually. Sorry. Well, Tristan, do you think the clean air? I mean, does that cause issues?
Not enforcement. The clean air zone doesn't enforcement, but that's because of the way it's structured. It doesn't. I think it affects testing my it affects taxis and buses. I do, and it doesn't affect me. That's the important part. And I believe Southampton was going to have one, but then didn't get one. I mean, we didn't need one in the end. It's not a problem down here at the moment. I think, though, also when we did the modelling in Portsmouth, because I was involved, there was a view that actually, had we just done nothing for 5 years, the industry was cleaning itself. The number of hybrids and electrics that were coming through, but what the point of the clean air zone was really to encourage some of those real dirty polluters to change. The construction industry in the city centre hasn't been affected because there hasn't been a lot of new development in the city centre for Portsmouth. I think in London it's a different story. It does have a massive effect on that, and people have to think differently. Last mile distribution centres, all that sort of stuff needs to come through. And I think that's generally how people want to go these days anyway. So there's a whole economic growth point around that as well.
Yeah, I mean it's quite related, but I know that from a repurposing of buildings it's been on many people's agendas over the course of the last 5 years or so, and particularly with pension funds who are grappling with that ESG strategy. So I'm quite keen on conversion, but actually the warranties of a lot of the old buildings don't lend themselves that well for that product. So there's that kind of juxtaposition between the two, and I'm not sure that's been quite resolved yet.
Good. Anybody else? Here we go.
Where there's been a lot of talk about 1.5 million homes for years now, and where it's about providing homes for the people that actually need it. Do you think that there's a need for that 1.5 million to be broken down to consider a specific number for older person's housing, in allowing them to move out of the family home, which then frees up the suburban home for new families?
Yeah, I mean it's a difficult one that really, because although the family home, freeing it up for future generations, you also got the inheritance tax issue as well, which often means that the family home needs to be sold, and often it wants to be sold as well. They want the money, but no. Anybody else want to have a crack at that? Can you remember the question?
There is a really important point though about making sure there is the right type of accommodation for people to move into in their older age, to ensure that actually they don't live in a home that's not great for their health and well-being, for maybe they don't want to sell it for inheritance purposes, but actually it's not great for their health and well-being, and we don't really want to be putting people in residential care homes either too early, because that's also really bad for them. So there is a really important market around the extra care housing system, and actually at the moment extra care really seems to be mainly focused on people who are on local authority housing waiting lists. So there is something about moving that into the wider market, which isn't a retirement flat, because extra care is different from a retirement flat if the market's been built. So I don't think that answers your question, but it is a really important thing for me to think about. I think it's a really important point for wider society, is we've got elderly people living in properties that just aren't suitable for them. They'll probably hasten a demise for them. They're just not living the best lives they should do.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to point out as well that a lot of the schemes that are being sold, like Wright Yard, being sold by charters, and Rivermead Gardens in Alton as well, being sold by Cllr and charters. The age demographic of the people buying flats in town centres is considerably higher, and actually they're competing with first-time buyers. Wright Yard in Farnham, for instance, the age range is 60 to 80. But I think when you're looking to sell your, I think it's a longer conversation, but obviously with a retirement property, the price of a retirement property isn't modelled on a pound per square foot basis. It's modelled, like for instance McCarthy and Stone and others, on how much a 3-bedroom semi-detached house is locally. So actually to sell your family home and move into a normal apartment which isn't retirement and potentially quite expensive, that is interesting how that is, how that is in our towns, how that's competing against first-time buyers as well, with flats really. So, does that answer your question? Kind of, yeah. Right. Time for a beer yet? Right, any other questions? No? Okay, good. Right, well, thank you very much, and thank you all you guys for coming to.